The desperate signal. The galaxy was vast, stretching across countless stars and countless planets, but for one distant corner, peace was a fading dream. A small, unknown species had been living on the edge of extinction, struggling to survive against an unknown force. They were alone, facing destruction from an enemy too powerful to fight back. The only thing they could do was send out a call, a signal, desperate and filled with fear, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear it. The message was brief but filled with urgency. It was clear that the aliens who sent it had no time to waste. The galaxy was full of powerful species, and yet not a single one had come to their aid. Their call had gone unnoticed by everyone, except one: the humans of Earth. For decades, Earth had been mostly silent, its fleets hidden deep within the planets and moons of the system. The humans were not known for their great numbers or powerful allies in space, but their history was one of survival, of overcoming impossible odds. And when the signal reached Earth, it was met with a quiet response. At first, no one knew how to react. The signal was not meant for them. It was not even meant to be heard by the more advanced races. But humanity had a way of responding to problems that others couldn't even fathom. Their instincts were different. They didn't hesitate. The moment the message came through, human leaders gathered in secret. They were a mixture of military commanders, scientists, and strategists, people who knew that when the galaxy called for help, it could only mean one thing: danger. "Should we respond?" asked one of the scientists, her voice trembling slightly. It was a big question, a dangerous one. "We have no choice," came the firm reply from General Daniels, a seasoned veteran of countless wars and battles. "If we don't respond, it will be one less call for help in the galaxy. And what happens when it's our turn? Who will come for us?" The room fell silent. The general's words hung in the air like a dark cloud. The truth was simple. The humans weren't the most powerful race in the galaxy, but they were survivors, and they understood that sometimes helping others meant securing their own survival. No one knew what was coming, but the people of Earth were ready to find out. General Daniels stood up, his hand hovering over the old command console. This wasn't an ordinary decision. This was one that could change everything. After a few moments, he slammed his fist down onto the panel, and the room filled with light. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered. Across Earth, hidden away in forgotten bunkers and underground facilities, the human fleet, one of the oldest and most powerful in the galaxy, began to stir. These ships were not modern creations, but ancient war machines, built long before humanity even knew what true space travel was. They were remnants of a forgotten age, a time when humans had been forced to defend themselves from even darker threats. But they were powerful. Each ship was a testament to humanity's will to survive. The fleet had remained dormant for generations, locked away in silence, hidden from the galaxy that had long since forgotten about Earth's military might. But now, they were about to awaken. As Earth's fleet began to power up, the distant species, far away from Earth, had no idea what was about to happen. They had no idea that the call they had sent out in desperation had reached the one species capable of turning the tide. They had no idea that their distress signal had sparked something unimaginable. The Deathworlder fleet was waking up, and nothing in the galaxy could prepare anyone for the fury that was about to be unleashed. On Earth, the human leaders watched the fleet come to life, their ships emerging from their underground lairs. It was as if the ancient vessels had been waiting, as if they had known this day would come. The message from the alien species had opened the door to a new chapter in galactic history, and now humanity was about to show the universe what they were truly capable of. The first steps of the fleet were cautious as the ships exited Earth's atmosphere. Slowly, they began their journey toward the unknown. The mission was clear: respond to the call. Help those who had reached out in desperation. But no one knew how far this would go, or just how dangerous the enemies were that humanity was about to face. The human fleet moved silently, but its power was undeniable. Each ship was a fortress in space, capable of leveling entire planets, and with each passing second, their weapons systems powered up, ready for whatever came next. On the alien homeworld, the species that had sent the distress call began to prepare for the arrival of the mysterious fleet. They had never seen anything like the massive human ships. They had no idea what to expect, but their hope was growing. Maybe, just maybe, help was on the way. As the humans drew closer to the alien planet, they had no idea just how much this simple call for help would change the galaxy forever. It wasn't just about saving the helpless species. It was about showing the universe that humanity had a strength no one could ignore. The galaxy would soon learn that when the weakest called for help, the most unexpected response came from the most unlikely of heroes. The Deathworlders had heard the call, and they were ready to answer. The first wave of Earth's fleet was already beyond the edges of their solar system, heading toward the distant stars. Each ship moved with precision, a carefully calculated choreography that had been honed over countless generations. The fleet was not just a collection of warships, but a symbol of humanity's survival. For years, it had remained hidden, buried in the deepest vaults of Earth, its existence almost forgotten. Now, it was about to reveal itself to the galaxy. As the fleet moved farther from their home planet, tension began to build. The human commanders were well aware of the gravity of the situation. They had prepared for many types of conflict over the years, but nothing like this. They had never expected that the first real test of their might would come from a distress call, a cry for help, a desperate plea from an unknown species that could be anyone from the galaxy's forgotten races to an entirely new enemy. General Daniels, now aboard the lead ship, stood on the command deck, watching the stars streak by. His eyes were fixed on the view screen, but his mind was elsewhere, piecing together all the possibilities. It had been so long since humanity had fought in an open war. The thought that they might be the ones to bring salvation, to wield their ancient strength to save another species, was both humbling and terrifying. He turned to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Morgan, a woman whose instincts and intelligence had made her invaluable to the fleet. "What are we walking into, Lieutenant?" he asked, his voice steady, but there was a hint of uncertainty underneath. Morgan, looking at her own console, didn't immediately answer. She wasn't sure. They had only the distress signal to go on, and it was vague at best. They knew nothing about the species, the enemy, or what they might be walking into. "We'll know soon enough, sir," she replied, keeping her voice calm. The signal was clear about one thing. They're in trouble, and if we can't help them, no one else will. It wasn't an overstatement. The galaxy was home to powerful forces, but none of them had come to the aid of the species. None had answered the call. That's why the humans had responded. But no one knew what kind of danger was waiting. Meanwhile, on the alien planet, their leaders were preparing for the unexpected. The mysterious fleet, unlike anything they had ever seen, was coming closer with every passing hour. Their advanced technology allowed them to detect the ships far in advance, and yet they knew nothing about the humans who were behind them. It was the first time they had ever encountered such a response, and for them, it was both a ray of hope and a cause for fear. The aliens were caught between anticipation and dread. The communications officers on the alien planet continued to monitor the approach of the fleet, transmitting sporadic messages in the hope of establishing contact. But the humans did not respond right away. They did not want to give away their position too soon. As the human fleet neared the alien planet, the scale of the mission became all too clear. General Daniels gathered his officers for a briefing in the war room of the flagship. A large holographic map of the galaxy was displayed in the center, and the alien world was marked with a red flashing beacon. Daniels studied it, his finger tracing the route they had taken. "We'll make contact with the aliens within the next 24 hours, Daniels said, his voice a low rumble. "But we need to be prepared for anything. This could be a trap. The enemies might have set up bait for us, hoping we'd come rushing in. Or We could be walking into the most dangerous situation humanity has faced in centuries. Lieutenant Morgan stepped forward. "We'll be ready, General. But there's one thing I've been thinking about. If we engage, we're going in blind. The distress signal doesn't tell us much, and their enemies could be more dangerous than we've ever encountered." "Agreed," General Daniels said, his eyes narrowing. "But we have no choice. These people are in need, and they've asked for help. Our fleet may not be the largest, but it's powerful. And it's one of the few forces in the galaxy that can face whatever comes our way." As the hours ticked down, the fleet drew closer. The anticipation on Earth's ships grew by the minute, with every officer, every crew member, focused solely on the mission ahead. The fate of an entire species rested on their shoulders, and they could not afford to fail. Back on Earth, the civilians had no idea what was happening. Most of the world's population went about their daily lives, unaware that their military was preparing for an intergalactic conflict. Only a select few knew the true scale of what was about to unfold. The rest would find out soon enough, and when they did, they would understand just how strong their species really was. But as the fleet approached the alien world, the silence was deafening. No new communications came from the planet. No more signs of life from the alien species. It was as if the planet itself had become a ghost world. General Daniels leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concern. "What are they hiding?" he muttered to himself. "And what are we walking into?" The truth was, no one knew. They could only prepare for the worst and hope for the best. The unknown stretched ahead of them like an empty void, and all they could do was navigate it with strength and courage. As Earth's fleet entered the final stretch toward the alien planet, the tension on board the flagship was palpable. Every officer, every crew member could feel the weight of what was about to unfold. For the past few days, the fleet had been in a state of readiness, preparing for whatever awaited them on the surface of the alien world. The quiet anticipation had slowly begun to shift into something more tangible, the expectation of a battle. General Daniels stood in the command center, his gaze fixed on the large holomap that floated in front of him. The alien world was now so close that he could almost feel the weight of its gravity, pulling them in. His mind raced with possibilities. Was this just a rescue mission? Or had the distress signal been part of a larger, more insidious plan to lure them into a trap? "Sir, we've detected energy signatures," reported Lieutenant Morgan from her station. "Something massive is moving in orbit. It's unlike anything we've ever seen." Daniel's eyes shot to the screen, his heart rate quickening. "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady despite the growing pressure. "It's a fleet," Morgan replied, her voice cold. "But it's not the kind of fleet we're used to. It's different. It's not even showing up as a standard military formation. These ships are armed, but they're not structured like any we've encountered. They're smaller, more agile." "Could they be the enemies?" Daniels asked, his voice dark with concern. Morgan nodded. "It's possible. They'd been hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to get close. Whatever's going on down there, it's not just a distress call. It's a warning." The fleet commander didn't need more convincing. He could already sense the storm brewing in the depths of space. This wasn't just a simple rescue mission anymore. This was shaping up to be humanity's first real confrontation with an unknown enemy in centuries. "We've arrived," Daniels said, his voice decisive. "Prepare for deployment. We're going in." As the order was passed down, the ships began their descent toward the planet. The colossal engines hummed with power, sending them through the atmosphere with precision. The alien world was a barren one, its surface scarred by what appeared to be years of neglect. Dark clouds swirled above, creating a sense of unease. But it was the strange silence that made Daniel's skin crawl. There were no signs of life, no signs of battle. The fleet's ships landed on the planet's surface, their massive landing gear sinking into the rocky terrain. The humans had arrived, but the atmosphere was anything but welcoming. The alien world was eerily still, as if it had been waiting for them to come. General Daniels stood at the entrance of the flagship, his boots crunching against the dusty ground as he surveyed the barren landscape. His mind raced with questions, but there was no time for answers yet. They had a mission to complete. "Lieutenant," he said, turning to Morgan, "take a team and scout the area. I want answers. Now." "Yes, sir," Morgan replied, gathering her team of highly trained soldiers. They moved swiftly, their footsteps barely making a sound as they crossed the desolate ground. Their weapons were drawn, ready for whatever the planet might throw at them. The moment the team crossed into the shadow of the distant mountains, the ground began to tremble. It was subtle at first, like the shift of a massive weight moving beneath them. But within seconds, the tremors grew stronger, more pronounced. The ground cracked open beneath their feet, sending shockwaves through the air. "Move! Get to cover!" Morgan shouted, but it was too late. From the cracks in the earth, massive, armored machines emerged, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. The humans had no choice but to react. The battle had begun. On board the flagship, Daniels and the rest of the crew could hear the deafening sound of explosions reverberating through the comms. The firefight had erupted without warning, and they were caught in the middle of it. The aliens they had come to help were now the very enemies they had to fight. "Deploy the rest of the fleet," Daniels barked. "We need backup now." The rest of Earth's fleet surged into action, their weapons lighting up the dark skies. Missiles and plasma blasts tore through the air as humanity's might collided with the alien machines. The ground shook with each impact, and the sky was filled with fire and smoke. The once peaceful planet had now turned into a battlefield. Lieutenant Morgan's team fought with everything they had, their training and experience kicking in as they engaged the alien machines. Their weapons were powerful, but they were outnumbered. The machines were relentless, their armor thick and almost impenetrable. Every shot fired by the humans seemed to have little effect, and the enemy responded with devastating force. But humanity's soldiers were not about to back down. They were Deathworlders, after all, and they had faced far worse in the past. Their strength came not just from their weapons, but from their will to survive. And they would fight until their last breath, if it meant saving the galaxy. Back in orbit, Earth's fleet continued to unleash its fury on the alien machines. The ships fired relentless barrages of plasma, aiming to disable the enemy's weapon systems and ground defenses. But for every machine they destroyed, two more seemed to rise from the ground, their firepower increasing with each wave. The battle was fierce, and it seemed that the humans were losing. But just as it seemed like all hope was lost, a massive explosion rocked the battlefield. The ground shook violently as a new force entered the fray. It was Earth's ultimate weapon. A ship unlike anything seen before emerged from the depths of the fleet. It was enormous, its hull lined with advanced technology that no other species had ever seen. Its weapons were powerful enough to destroy entire fleets, and its sheer size dwarfed the alien machines. With one massive pulse, the ship fired, unleashing an energy blast that tore through the enemy's defenses like paper. The alien machines crumbled beneath the force of the blast, and the tide of the battle began to shift. Humanity's fleet had arrived, and it was more than a match for whatever the galaxy could throw at them. The clash of titans had only just begun, and the aliens, they would soon learn that humanity was not a species to be trifled with. The battlefield was chaos. The once quiet alien world had been transformed into a war zone, its barren landscape now marked by craters, smoldering debris, and the remnants of fallen machines. Humanity's fleet, having unleashed its ultimate weapon, had broken the back of the alien defenses, but the war was far from over. The aliens were not giving up easily. As the dust settled, General Daniels surveyed the scene from his command center aboard the flagship. The enormous weapon ship, which had turned the tide in their favor, hovered overhead, its engines dimming as it recalibrated. The ship's cannons were silent now, but its impact had been undeniable. The enemy's forces were in disarray, their coordination severely weakened. Still, they were not retreating. It was clear that the battle was far from won. "Sir, we've received an urgent message from Lieutenant Morgan's team," Lieutenant Cruz reported, his voice tight with tension. "They've encountered more resistance. It's not just the machines. They're facing something else." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, something else?" Cruz hesitated before replying. "Human-like figures, sir. They're not dressed in standard combat gear. They appear to be leaders or commanders, and they're wielding advanced weapons." The news hit Daniels like a punch to the gut. It was clear now that the battle they were facing wasn't just a conflict between machines and humanity. It was a fight against an organized, highly intelligent force. The enemies had a strategy. They were planning to strike back, and humanity was now squarely in their sights. "Have Morgan and her team engaged?" Daniels asked, already preparing for the worst. "They're in the thick of it, sir," Cruz replied. "But they're outnumbered. I'm advising immediate reinforcements." Daniels didn't hesitate. "Send everything we've got. We're not letting them fall." On the surface of the planet, Lieutenant Morgan and her team were deep in enemy territory. The once empty mountainsides had become a dangerous maze of alien fortifications, with hostile forces hiding behind every corner. The humans had made significant progress, pushing forward with relentless determination, but the emergence of these new enemies had taken them by surprise. Morgan crouched behind a rocky outcrop, her pulse racing. Her team was pinned down by fire from enemy forces that seemed to be everywhere. Her squad was efficient, their training allowing them to hold their ground, but they were starting to feel the strain. Every move had to be calculated. Every shot had to count. "Lieutenant, they're closing in," Sergeant Davis shouted, his voice barely audible over the crackle of gunfire. "We need backup, now." Morgan looked out from her hiding spot and saw the alien commanders leading the charge, their glowing weapons cutting through the air. They weren't like the machines they had faced earlier. These enemies were fast, agile, and their attacks were precise. They had clearly been trained for battle. But Morgan wasn't backing down. "We can't wait for reinforcements," she muttered, determination setting in. "We hold this position. We stop them here." With that, she signaled her team to return fire. The battle raged on, the sound of weapons firing, explosions rocking the ground, and the unmistakable feeling that they were facing something far more dangerous than they had expected. Above them, the flagship launched its final wave of reinforcements. More ships descended onto the planet's surface, landing with precision and unleashing waves of soldiers, tanks, and aircraft. Earth's army wasn't just fighting for survival now. They were fighting to secure a future for the galaxy. Back at the command center, General Daniels watched as the reinforcements landed. He knew this was their last push. There could be no mistakes. The next few hours would determine whether humanity emerged victorious, or whether they would be overwhelmed by a force they could never have imagined. "Lieutenant Cruz, get those ships in position," Daniels ordered. "We need to secure the perimeter and push those enemy commanders back. This planet is ours now." Cruz acknowledged the order, but Daniels knew the fight would not be easy. The alien force was formidable, and they were adapting rapidly. The new alien commanders had proven themselves to be unpredictable and incredibly dangerous. It was only a matter of time before they came up with something even more lethal. "Sir, we're detecting more alien reinforcements," Cruz reported, his voice tight. "It's not just machines or soldiers. There are massive creatures emerging from the planet's core." Daniels stared at the screen in disbelief. "What do you mean, creatures?" "They're huge," Cruz continued. "They're biologically engineered, sir. It's as if they've been bred for war." Daniel's mind raced as he processed the information. These were no ordinary enemies. The alien species they were up against had an uncanny ability to adapt and evolve in response to human tactics. They were learning, growing stronger with every battle, and humanity had to match their strength if they hoped to survive. "We'll need everything we've got," Daniel said, determination in his voice. "Tell the fleet to prepare for the next wave. We fight to win. We fight to survive." As he spoke, the battle continued to unfold on the surface of the planet. The Deathworlders, human soldiers, fought with unmatched ferocity, but the aliens weren't going to make it easy. The ground shook as massive alien beasts charged into battle, their skin impenetrable and their strength overwhelming. The human forces fired relentlessly, their weapons lighting up the darkening sky, but the creatures kept coming, seemingly undeterred by the firepower aimed at them. Lieutenant Morgan and her team fought side by side with Earth's reinforcements, pushing back the alien commanders and machines. But the creatures were another story altogether. The humans were well trained, but they were still facing an enemy that had no equal in their experience. It was clear now that this battle wasn't just for survival, it was for the very future of the galaxy. The battle was at its peak, and the clock was ticking. Would humanity emerge victorious, or would the galaxy fall under the grip of an unstoppable force? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: humanity wasn't going down without a fight. The battlefield was a landscape of smoke and destruction. Humanity's forces were entrenched in a final push against a relentless alien threat that refused to back down. The situation had grown dire. Earth's soldiers, their numbers depleted and their supplies dwindling, were fighting with a desperation born of the realization that this would be their last stand if they didn't succeed. General Daniels paced back and forth in the command center, his gaze focused on the holographic map in front of him. His eyes scanned the various battle lines that were now drawn across the planet. In the distance, the massive warships, still hovering above the surface, continued to unleash their payloads on the enemy. But it wasn't enough. The alien creatures, these titanic biological weapons, had proven to be a nightmare. Their sheer size and resilience made them nearly impossible to take down with conventional weapons. Earth's forces had thrown everything they had at the creatures, but still they pressed forward, threatening to overrun their position. "Sir, the perimeter is failing," Kruz reported, his voice shaking slightly. "The creatures are pushing through, and we don't have enough reinforcements to stop them." Daniel's face hardened. The tension in his chest was palpable. They had been fighting for days, and the clock was ticking. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. If they didn't make a decisive move now, the planet, and possibly the galaxy, would be lost. "Get me Lieutenant Morgan," he barked. Within moments, the face of Lieutenant Morgan appeared on the command screen. Her expression was grim, the weariness of days of combat clearly showing, but there was no fear in her eyes, only determination. "Morgan," Daniels said, his voice steady but urgent. "We need to end this. Now. The creatures are pushing us back. We have one shot to stop them." Morgan nodded, gripping her weapon tightly. "We've been holding the line, sir, but they're adapting faster than we thought. The creatures aren't just getting stronger, they're getting smarter. But I have an idea. We need to use the flagship's weapon systems to target their weak points." Daniel's eyes widened in realization. The flagship's weapons had already done substantial damage to the enemy forces, but targeting the creatures specifically could be their last chance. "You're saying we focus all fire on their weak points. Where exactly?" Morgan quickly scanned the data on her end, her fingers moving over the screen. "They have weak spots on their underside. It's where the armor is thinner. If we can concentrate fire there, we might be able to take them down." Daniels clenched his fists. It was a risky move, but it was their only option. "Make it happen. We'll coordinate with you." The general turned to Kruz. "Tell the fleet to adjust their targeting systems. Prepare to fire on those coordinates. Every shot counts." Kruz nodded and hurriedly relayed the orders. On the surface, Lieutenant Morgan and her team moved swiftly, advancing toward the front lines where the alien creatures were causing the most destruction. They were pinned down by alien fire from every direction, but they fought with every ounce of strength they had. Every step was a struggle, but there was no turning back now. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the creatures charged forward, their massive claws tearing through the earth. Morgan's team had learned to time their shots carefully. aiming for the soft underbelly of the beasts, hoping to make each strike count. "Steady," Morgan called out as the team continued their assault, each soldier carefully targeting the vulnerable spots on the creatures. Suddenly, a massive explosion rang out overhead. The flagship's weapons had fired, and the impact was felt even on the ground. The alien creatures howled in pain as their armor was ripped apart, but still they pushed forward, seemingly undeterred by the assault. Morgan's heart raced as she fired another round. The creature in front of her reeled back, but it wasn't enough. She was running out of time. "Lieutenant," Sergeant Davis shouted, his voice urgent. "We can't hold them off much longer. We need more firepower." Morgan didn't hesitate. "Hold your ground, Davis. The flagship's weapons are almost in position. We just need a little longer." The battle raged on. The humans fought with everything they had, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. The alien creatures seemed unstoppable, their massive bodies brushing aside anything in their path. The sound of weapons fire, explosions, and the cries of fallen soldiers filled the air, mixing with the haunting roars of the enemy. Back at the command center, Daniels watched as the fleet continued to fire, their weapons lighting up the darkened sky. The aliens were taking hit after hit, but they were still advancing. Daniels' mind raced as he tried to calculate what they were missing. "Sir, the fleet reports that their weapons are at maximum power," Cruz said, his voice tight. "They're giving it everything they've got." Daniels nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen. "Tell them to keep firing. We have to break their will. We've already made it this far." On the ground, Morgan's team had reached the heart of the enemy's assault. The creatures were closing in, their massive claws digging into the earth as they surged forward. With one final cry, Morgan activated her comms. "Now, Commander, hit them with everything." The flagship's cannons roared to life once more, and this time, the fire was concentrated on the creature's vulnerable weak points. Explosions erupted in the air as energy blasts tore through the alien beasts, their bodies buckling and collapsing to the ground. For a moment, it felt like the entire planet shook as the creatures' numbers dwindled. The massive beasts roared in agony, their once imposing figures now crumbling beneath the weight of humanity's fury. But even as the creatures fell, new threats emerged. A final wave of alien reinforcements, led by their elite forces, descended upon the battlefield, determined to make one last stand. They were relentless, unyielding, and driven by an unwavering will to conquer. The humans were battered, their forces dwindling, but they refused to give in. The battle for the galaxy's future was not over. It was a fight that would push humanity's resolve to the breaking point. And in that moment, General Daniels knew that no matter the cost, they had to win. There could be no surrender. There could be no retreat. This was the moment where humanity would either rise to its greatest challenge or fall into oblivion. And with that, humanity launched its final charge. The Earth trembled as the battle continued. What had started as a desperate fight for survival had now turned into a battle for the future of humanity. The creatures were relentless. They had never known defeat, and their hatred for humanity had only grown with every passing minute. But the humans, though battered and weary, refused to give up. General Daniels stood tall in the command center, eyes fixed on the battlefront. He knew this was their final chance. The last remaining forces on Earth, scattered and exhausted, were assembling for one last stand. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and fatigued beyond belief. Yet, their resolve had never been stronger. They were humanity's last hope, and they would fight with everything they had left. "Report," Daniels demanded, his voice steady but firm. Cruz, his trusted officer, stood by the console, watching the screens intently. "General, the last wave of reinforcements has arrived, but we've lost more ground. The creatures are adapting quickly. The flagship's weapons are nearly depleted." Daniels clenched his jaw. They were running out of options, but there had to be something they could do. "Send the signal to all remaining troops," Daniels ordered. "We fight with everything we have left. This ends today." The call to arms was heard across the battlefield, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Humanity's forces, though exhausted, stood together, resolute. They had faced impossible odds before, and today would be no different. They would rise once again, proving that the strength of the human spirit could overcome anything. On the front lines, Lieutenant Morgan and her team prepared for the final assault. Their faces were grim, but their determination was unwavering. They knew that this fight would cost them everything, but they also knew that humanity's future depended on it. Morgan checked her weapon, making sure it was fully charged. Her team, a mixture of seasoned veterans and new recruits, stood beside her, ready for the onslaught. The creatures were coming. They could hear the sound of massive claws scraping against the earth, the deafening roars of the alien beasts echoing in the distance. The tension was palpable. "Stay focused," Morgan said to her team, her voice calm yet urgent. "We hold this line no matter what. We've come this far. We won't let them take Earth." The soldiers nodded, their expressions hardening. They had been through hell and back, but now it was their time to prove that humanity would not bow to anyone, not even these monstrous invaders. The alien creatures surged forward, their immense bodies moving with terrifying speed and power. The ground shook as they closed in on the human lines. Morgan's team opened fire, their weapons unleashing a deadly barrage of energy blasts. The creatures howled in pain, but they were unstoppable, crashing forward like a tide that could not be held back. "Hold the line," Morgan shouted, rallying her soldiers. For what seemed like hours, the battle raged on. The human soldiers fought fiercely, determined to protect their world, but the alien creatures were relentless. Every shot fired seemed to only slow them for a moment before they charged forward again, their unyielding will carrying them forward. Morgan's team was in the thick of it, each soldier giving their all to stop the wave of destruction. Their weapons glowed with deadly energy as they targeted the weak points of the creatures. But the creatures kept coming, relentless, unbending. Then, through the smoke and chaos, a glimmer of hope appeared. The flagship had repositioned, its massive cannons charged once again. With a deafening roar, the flagship unleashed its most powerful weapon yet. The ground shook violently as the energy blasts from the flagship tore through the air, landing squarely on the creature's weak spots. The explosion was massive. For a moment, everything went silent. The creatures reeled back in shock, their once unstoppable march faltering. But the victory was short-lived. The elite alien forces, those that had survived the initial bombardment, regrouped and surged forward, determined to break the human lines once and for all. Daniels watched in horror as the creatures advanced, their power and fury unmatched. But he refused to let fear take hold. The fate of humanity rested in the hands of these brave soldiers. They had already defied the odds countless times, and now it was time for them to make their final stand. "We can't let them reach the city," Daniel said, his voice calm but resolute. "We need to push back, and we need to do it now." The final order went out, and humanity's remaining forces made one last desperate push. The battlefield erupted into chaos once more. Explosions rocked the ground as humans and aliens clashed in a final brutal confrontation. The creatures were relentless, but humanity's soldiers fought with a fury and determination that could not be matched. Morgan and her team fought on, even as their numbers dwindled. With every step forward, they pushed the creatures back, refusing to let them destroy everything they had fought for. The human resolve, the strength of their will, was their greatest weapon. As the last of the creatures fell, the battlefield fell eerily silent. The destruction was unimaginable. Earth had been ravaged, but humanity had held firm. The alien forces had been pushed back, their will shattered by the unyielding courage of the human spirit. But as General Daniel surveyed the battlefield, he knew this victory came at a great cost. The war was not over, but the aliens had learned a valuable lesson today. Never underestimate the fury of humanity. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had proven its strength. The SOS that had once called for help had now turned into a symbol of humanity's resilience, a reminder to all that when pushed to the edge, humans would rise up and fight, no matter the odds. The battle for Earth had been won, but the future remained uncertain. And as the survivors stood amidst the ruins, they knew that this was just the beginning of something much greater. The war was not over, but for now, humanity had won. The war had ended, but the cost was immeasurable. The Earth lay in ruins, its once thriving cities reduced to piles of rubble. The scars of battle etched across the landscape. The alien invaders had been repelled, their forces shattered, but humanity's victory came with an undeniable price. General Daniels stood alone, staring out over the wasteland that had once been a bustling city. The silence was almost deafening after the chaos of the battle, a stark reminder of the destruction left in the wake of the war. There were no more cries of battle, no more explosions, just the quiet aftermath of a conflict that had nearly torn everything apart. He took a deep breath, his thoughts heavy with the weight of the decisions he had made, the lives that had been lost, and the sacrifices that had been given. The cost of victory was not one that could be measured in numbers alone, but humanity had prevailed. Against all odds, they had fought, they had bled, and they had won. Around him, the survivors began to emerge, their faces marked by exhaustion, grief, and resolve. The men and women who had fought for Earth stood together, their unity forged through the fires of war. They had fought for their families, for their homes, and for each other. And now, they stood in the aftermath, uncertain of what the future held. Lieutenant Morgan stood beside Daniels, her face grim but resolute. She had lost comrades, friends, and even parts of herself during the battle. But now, as the dust settled, she felt a quiet pride stirring within her. They had survived. They had shown the galaxy the power of human strength and resolve. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Daniels glanced at her, his expression unreadable. The question hung in the air, an unspoken weight that none of them could ignore. What did come next? They had won the battle, but the war had changed them. Earth had changed. The galaxy had changed. "We rebuild," Daniel said after a moment, his voice steady. "We rebuild, and we prepare. The war may be over, but the universe is still out there, and there will be those who will remember our strength. We cannot let our guard down." Morgan nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. The creatures they had faced were not the only threat in the universe. They had fought hard, and they had won. But humanity had learned the hard way that peace was never guaranteed. It had to be fought for, earned, and defended at all costs. As the survivors began to pick up the pieces, the true extent of the damage became clear. Cities were in ruins, agriculture had been destroyed, and the once thriving ecosystems were now in tatters. The war had taken its toll, not just on the human population, but on the planet itself. But in the midst of this devastation, there was also hope. The human spirit, battered but unbroken, began to rise from the ashes. The first steps toward rebuilding had begun. Supplies were being gathered, makeshift shelters were being constructed, and the leadership of humanity began to reorganize.